So that would be an incorporation by reference issue. So
Yeah,
now,
but the specific question is, what is that actual gift or the device failing to have that makes it invalid?
so it's failing to have some kind of testamentary language or something to indicate that it's a will.
Well, no, you want to complicate it that much. It's just on the face of the will, you don't know what the gift is. I'm giving Matt what is on the Post-it note in the drawer. Well, if the executor is reading that and that only, he's going to be like, I don't know what to give Matt, right? So that would be why it would fail. So again, now we're talking about the terms. Matt, as you pointed out, Shane, would then want to use a theory like incorporation by reference to try to save that. So again, look at the kind of like trajectory that we're going. First three sections, creation, revocation, and saving, is like, what is my will? Then we're getting into like, all right, are there any issues on the face of this will for why certain lines, certain gifts will be invalid, and can I save them? All right. Now the next section is stuff happens. Right? I keep my materials PG, but sometimes in live it gets a little R-rated. I like to call this section shit happens, right? Because the idea is that after, and actually let me ask, let's go with Miriam for this section. We're talking about a time period. We're talking about a time period. What do you think the time period that we're looking for to shit happen?
During their lifetime?
Okay, during their lifetime, but specifically after when?
After they write the will?
Exactly. You're looking at the time period of after the will was created and before the testator died. And if shit happened during that time frame, then you have to see how that will impact the will. So again, we're not looking at, is this will valid anymore? We're not looking at, is this particular term in the will valid? But we're like, dang, well, DeAndre had a will where he left something to Sasha, but Sasha predeceased DeAndre. Something happened. How is that going to affect the will? Or another popular one. DeAndre says he's going to leave his very specific 1969 Mustang to Michelle. But what happens is, after I make my will and before I die, I sell that Mustang and give it to somebody else. Shit happens. How does that affect the will? So that is the stuff happens section. Then after that, we have protecting the spouse and child. This is something that, you know, if you guys haven't gotten there yet, this is something you want to consider more towards the end of your wills analysis, no matter what professor you're doing on the bar as well. And basically, if there's any spouse or child that was left out of the will, they are going to try and recover under a theory within that section. So if I had DeAndre Jr. and he was a little punk and I didn't put him in my will and then I died, he would want to challenge the will by saying, all right, well, I'm a child, I wasn't in here, I want to use this theory to be able to recover. And if he's able to recover, what they'll do is take from other people's gifts, if necessary, to then give him something under the will, okay? But just because I leave a kid out or somebody leaves a kid out doesn't mean they'll for sure take, because if it's intentional, if it's like done the right way, you can totally do that. We all know that. People do that all the time. All right, and then lastly, we have the other section, right? We won't get into that. That's obviously just other, like little smaller things that, you know, don't need to kind of like crowd your big picture. So that's it. Now, what I would recommend doing is either one, quickly printing, if you have a nearby printer, this first level, or just simply recreate this on a piece of paper. I think this is going to be something good for you to fill out as we go through, okay? As we kind of build out these sections, you can go ahead and, like, you know, see it come to life on your own as well. All right, so as you guys do that, we will now creation. Yeah, so we'll go ahead now and get started with the first section, and that is going to be creation. Okay, I don't know if you guys can see in the video. If I'm ever looking down like this, I'm looking at the blueprint on my iPad. All right, so within creation, right? So creation is pretty straightforward, right? Let's not complicate what we're thinking about and what we're doing. And actually, I see some people have taken a quick step away, it looks like, to get their printout. So let me give it just one quick more second. Okay. And by the way, you know, for all those that do plan on doing bar prep, to whatever extent we do have stuff on Zoom, I like to see faces. So, you know, I know it's Saturday morning, I see a lot of black screens, but just know during bar prep, I'll be calling y'all out and see them faces. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Victoria back in the chair, cool. Alrighty, so we're doing creation. Again, it's pretty simple. You have to see if the will was validly created. Sometimes on a fact pattern, all they give you is one will, and you have to see it as valid. Sometimes they'll give you multiple documents, and anything that's created after the original will, that's going to be considered a codicil, right? Go through the same exact steps as you do a will. You have to see if it's properly created. You got 3 elements for proper creation. Matt, do you know those 3 elements, man?
Testimony intent,
Yep.
capacity, and then it's got to meet the formalities.
Perfect. 3 elements, clean, easy. So go ahead and if you rewrote your chart or printed it out, under creation, make a little 3-pronged branch. Those are your 3 things: creation, intent, and formalities. Nothing too complicated there. All right, so then now we're going to go ahead and break down the first section, and that is going to be capacity. All right, so overall, this is typically not like a prioritized issue on an essay. Right, you could get some MBE on it or multiple choice for your people still in school. Obviously, this is not an MBE topic on the bar. You definitely want to know this section, but again, it's pretty straightforward. So I'll just do a quick skim through this section, starting off with our folder system, our breakdown of what's within this. Capacity has 2 major sections, and if you want to follow along now, I'm on the blueprint. You have legal capacity and you have mental capacity. Those are the 2. Legal capacity is simple. No minors can make wills. You got to be at least 18 years old, straightforward, simple. Mental capacity, right? That's pretty straightforward. The person has to be of right and sound mind in order to make a will. And you're looking for mental capacity at the time of creation. Just because somebody may have mental capacity issues that are sporadic and maybe come here and there, if they didn't have a mental capacity issue at the time of creation, then there's no issue, okay? Then what you want to make sure you know is that you have this 3-step framework or these 3 elements to show that mental capacity is met. I'm not going to run through that rule right now because we're going to do a hypo and then we're going to actually run through the rule that way. But do know that that is your focus of mental capacity, is those 3 elements, right? We have some notes there, pretty straightforward. Obviously, if you have no mental capacity, that means the will is not valid, right? Pretty straightforward. Lastly, you have a section of insane delusion. Let's go with Robert. Robert, do you think whenever you discuss creation, are you going to always talk about insane delusion or only if it's triggered?
Only if it's triggered.
Only if it's triggered, right? Mental capacity, you always need to, unless creation as a whole, you're told not to discuss it, you're going to want to go through those 3 elements, and maybe you might just go through it quickly if it's simple. But insane delusion, you're really going to only go into this if you have very specific facts for it. Again, we have a hypo for this, so we'll hold off on any further detail. All right, with that said, let's move over to doing our first hypo. So go ahead and pull up your hypos. Okay. Give me a little thumbs up. I know you guys got the hypos. Good, good, good. Perfect. All right, so I'll start reading it. You can kind of read along with it that you have it. All right, so Trevor is a med student at Howard Medical School. HU, it's my alma mater. Trevor has 2 siblings, Brent and Sandra. Trevor has 2 parents, his mother, Mary, and his father, Frank. Trevor is a smart student, but is addicted to Molly, a popular party drug, and alcohol. Trevor is aware of his vices and the risk it puts on his life, so he decides to create a will so that his assets can be distributed in the way he'd like. He first asked his friend Larry, who is a legally fit law student, how to create a will. Larry gives him the basics on how to create a handwritten will. Trevor then created a handwritten will that divides all of his assets to be split equally amongst Brent, Sandra, and Mary. Hope you're doing that reading comprehension as you're going. Already we see somebody was left out. Trevor signed the will. What arguments can Frank reasonably make in objecting the validity of Trevor's will? So we said we had 3 elements: capacity, intent, formalities, right? And then let's go with, and correct me if I don't pronounce it correctly, Shaviante. Oh, you're muted.
I had to find my mouse. Yeah, that's correct.
All right, cool. All right, so it's gonna be the best. Say it again.
I say you can just say Shavi.
Shavi. Okay, cool. So Shavi, what's going to be the best way to attack the valid creation of this will?
I would say go through the 3 that you need for a valid will: the capacity, intent, formalities.
And out of those 3, what seems to be something that you really have facts to discuss? Like, what seems to be a prioritized issue out of those 3?
Capacity.
Capacity for sure, right? Let's run through it. Legal capacity, is that met?
Yes.
How do we know that?
I'm making an inference, but he's a Howard Med student.
There we go. So this is really good. Again, I'm teaching you guys for your wills class, but also for the bar. And you got to learn how to make sure you use what facts are given to you. And yeah, they don't actually tell you the age, but then you can use the facts that he is a med school student. So from that, we can infer that he is over the age of 18, because you got to, unless he's some child prodigy that went straight to med school at like 15. So good. Legal capacity is met. Next, we would go to mental capacity. Before we get into it, and this is part of like the thought process you guys have to do, where you're not just like, super robotic when you're analyzing, but you're kind of like thinking, what is Frank's, right, essentially argument? What's the source of his argument for why mental capacity is going to be an issue?
I would say because Trevor is addicted to Molly. So there's a possibility he could have been on the drug while he created the document.
Perfect. And the fact that I'm his father and he left me out, right? Which will definitely come in through one of the elements.
Yeah.
Awesome. That is definitely the gist. So now, in order to challenge mental capacity, you got to go through those 3 elements. Shavi, go ahead. Let's just do the first one with you, then we'll move to somebody else. The first one is that the testator knew the nature of his testamentary acts. What facts are you going to pull from to prove that he did know the nature of his testamentary acts?
Him being aware of his vices and the risks that it's putting on his life. So he created the will so that there could be no question as to how his things would be distributed.
Perfect. Well, I would say near perfect. The other fact that you would want to add in there too is that he actually took the steps to also reach out to a friend and get essentially some advice on how to create it. And so again, a little small, right, tip when it comes to essay writing is that that's how you're going to soak up all those points, is right, making sure you just almost verbatim put in all of those appropriate facts. But good job. Next, Nicole knew his assets, right? How are you going to analyze that section as to whether Trevor knew of his assets?
For that, because he said that he wanted to make sure that they were distributed equally between them, between his sister or his siblings and his mom.
And what did he essentially give? He gave all his assets.
Yes.
Right? Now, here's something I want you guys to make sure you really add in the repertoire. I can't tell you how often I use this on essays, is something along those lines of what we said just there, Nicole, yours and mine together, and then ending that with, there are no facts present to suggest that he did not know the nature, right? So that whole argument of there are no facts to suggest the opposite is, again, something very common that I'll use to make my point or just kind of drive it home. So, and that's the case there. So you can assume that element is met. And then lastly, knew the nature of his bounty. And so this one is where we have arguments on both sides. Megan, can you go ahead and, man, I might have to give you a Room of the Day award. I like that, that accent wall looking real nice. Can you give me the arguments on both sides for knew the nature of the bounty, the natural bounty of her estate? What does that element mean? Let's start off with that. What does it mean for the testator to know the natural bounty of their estate?
The worth of it, no.
So knowing the natural bounty of the estate is going to mean that you know the natural people that are supposed to take. So that's why mental capacity can always essentially be an issue when you kind of have a head scratching moment as to like, oh, that person was left out. And here you have that because it was his father, Frank, that was left out. So that's what natural bounty, and to the extent that you actually have an issue with mental capacity, it's going to be somebody who, let's say, is of old age and maybe has dementia. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like, I don't even know who to leave my stuff to. I'll just give it to the gardener, when it's like that whole time they had like their daughter and mom that they loved to death, but just couldn't think of them at the time. That's where you like have a real issue. But back to now this fact pattern, what are the arguments on both sides, Megan?
Well, that he included everybody but the dad.
Mm-hmm.
That would be an argument that he wasn't in the right mental state. It was like, how do you forget that? I guess then there could be an argument that we don't have any facts, but maybe he didn't get along with his dad.
And we don't have any facts for that. And that's pretty much it on, like, you can dive into it a little bit more, but not in the way where you need more facts. But you would just say that Frank is going to argue that he did not know the natural bounty of his estate because he left me out of his will, and I'm his father. One does not leave their father out of the will unless there's a specific reason to do so. And there are no facts here to suggest, right, that there's an issue for him to leave his father out. And then, period. What's the argument on the other side? It's going to be using almost the same thing again. There are no facts to suggest that what?
That there.
You want to phone a friend?
Yeah.
All right, you got to pick somebody. Who you going to call
on? Maybe, Miriam. I know she's got it.
There are no facts to suggest that, what was his name?
Trevor.
There are no facts to suggest that Trevor did intentionally leave his father out.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, right. And then you can also, I usually like to use that there are no facts to suggest again at the end. You could even start off with more actual facts and say, Trevor's going to argue, or obviously Trevor's dead, so the person that's the advocate for the will is going to argue that he did know the natural bounty of his estate because he left it to his mom, his brother, and his sister, who are natural people to take. And just because somebody leaves out a family member doesn't mean they didn't know the natural bounty of their estate, blah, 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 however you want to word it. There are no facts that suggest that, he didn't know that his dad, was alive and should take. He just didn't include him. And that's the thing, is think about it. And that's where you have to remember to think practically, right? There's times all the time where you don't put your dad in the will, your mom in the will, a particular kid in the will. And that doesn't mean you're going to lack mental capacity. So you have to balance it out with that logic. Okay. So ultimately, how are we going to conclude here, Miriam? Is that there is or is not mental capacity?
It is likely that there is mental capacity.
It is likely that there is mental capacity. And again, remember the whole issue, which you could kind of factor in, as far as just like in the beginning or the end, or somehow in the elements, the fact that he, even though he's addicted to Molly and alcohol, there are no facts to suggest that he was under the influence at the time of creation. Now, had these facts been different and he was on a trip at Coachella and decided to make this will, then that would change, right, the outcome. All right, let's move on to hypo number 2. Let's do this one pretty quickly. We can move on from capacity. This is hypo number 2. Harry was married to Wendy for 40 years. Both are 70 years of age and have not created wills. Harry is now creating his will. He is aware that his only asset is the house he owned before marriage. Right now that you already have the mind for it, where is that fact going? He is aware that his only asset is the house he owned before marriage. Victoria.
For capacity,
Uh-huh.
are you talking specifically?
Mm-hmm. Somebody else? What element is that going directly to?
That he knows his assets.
Exactly, right? So once you start to get this, you can kind of see it as you read, right? He is aware that his only asset is the house that he owned before marriage. Harry wants to create a will, right? There, he knows the nature of his testamentary act because he realizes that he is in the last chapter of his life. Harry's only living relative is his son, Sam. Harry hired a lawyer to create a will that divides all of his assets to his son, Sam. Harry told Wendy that she was left out of the will because he was aware that she had been cheating on him since the day they were married with his best friend, Ben. However, Wendy pleaded with Harry to change the will because she had never had an affair with Ben. In fact, Wendy had never seen or met Ben. What arguments can Wendy reasonably make in objecting to the validity of Harry's will? So again, we're seeing here there's a prioritized capacity issue. Robert, what did we not focus on in our blueprint overview that is now going to be a major talking point for this hypo?
Oh, sorry, I spaced out.
Oh, shit, Robert. Well, appreciate the honesty. But I'll tell you, I'm calling on you again to say the exact same section that I called on you for last time. And it was, yep, you got it?
Mental capacity.
Insane delusion, right? That was a section that we didn't go over in detail. And that's what we have here. Running through mental capacity real quick, what do we think? Shane, do you think mental capacity is met here? The three elements?
So mental capacity, and that he knew the boundaries of his estate. That seems like that was the case, but the biggest issue was that.
I want you to go further. Are those three elements met? Did he know the nature of his testamentary acts? Did he know his assets? And did he know the natural boundary of his estate?
Well, it says his only asset was.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
Are the three elements met? Yes or no?
I'll go with yes.
Yeah, this one's pretty straightforward here. He knew the nature of his testamentary acts, right? He said he wanted to create a will. He knew his assets. He knew his only asset was the house. And it doesn't say anything about him not knowing that his wife was alive or that his son is his only living heir. So all of these elements seem to be slam dunk met. Now, what we have here, though, is the issue of an insane delusion. He left his wife out of the will because he thought that she was cheating on him, but the facts make it very clear that she was not doing that at all. And it's only when it can rise to the level of an insane delusion is one going to be able to defeat this for mental capacity issue. What's essentially the primary fact for why this could be considered an insane delusion?
So the fact that he never cheated on her.
But even more so,
never seen or met Ben.
Exactly. Because if it was just that she had never actually cheated, but it was something along the lines of they took vacations together, they hung out all the time together, went to dinner, it wouldn't be an insane delusion. It would just be something he was wrong about. That's fine. That wouldn't defeat mental capacity. But the fact that he has this strong of a feeling when she has never even met Ben or seen Ben, that is what's really driving home a strong argument for insane delusion. Look at your three elements. There was a false belief by T that she had slept around. It was unreasonable because they had never met before at all. And then T would not have done the distribution but for the delusion. He would have included his wife, but for his belief that she was sleeping around. All right, so that's insane delusion. Again, not super, super common, but again, I want you guys to be comfortable with it, familiar with it. remember, you don't need to talk about insane delusion every time you talk about mental capacity. You need to have facts that require it. All right, so we are now done with capacity. We're done with that section.
Sorry, can I ask you a quick question?
Oh, I'm supposed to open up to questions, and I was just about to do.
Sorry.
How many questions do we have? Now go for it.
Sorry. So for insane delusion, do you have to hit all 3 of the elements listed?
Yes, you need all 3 elements. Yeah, and so yeah, any questions on capacity as a whole is now the floor for that.
I have a question. I know this is like super minor, but in the second hypo, how he only had the house as his asset, but the will says he's leaving all of his assets. Is that like a point where we should focus on about whether or not he knew what his assets were, if it's like one versus many?
That's a perfect question, and I want you everybody like pay attention to that question. So what you caught up there, Rosie, was like something that's a very finite kind of thing, right? And what that comes down to is that, like, is that worth my time? Is that worth an argument? And is that something that I've seen in the past is the type of nuance that they're looking for me to trigger? And so I would say my answer to that is based off of the fact that I've never seen them, you know, catch something as small as like, he only has one asset, but he then writes, I leave all my assets, right? Because even then it could just be like, just in case there was something else, you just write it as all assets. That would be something if like on the exam, you didn't really have much else to talk about and, you know, I need something. But otherwise, if you're in the zone and you're feeling efficient and you know you got things to talk about, that level of an argument, I wouldn't make. Awesome. Yeah, so make sure you guys, again, back of your head, again, a lot of this is getting you ready for the bar. And great question. And it's kind of like, you have to like constantly, one, know the law, but evaluating where to spend your time. So great question. Okay, so if there are no more questions, let's move on to intent.
Can I ask one question really quick?
Oh yeah, go for it, Matt.
Yeah, just a quick question. I know it's really small, but I saw in the essay tip too, it brought up drugs and alcohol. If someone was, I know it's very minor, but if someone was having some sort of insane delusion because of drugs, would that still count? Or does it have to be like a mental disorder? Like if something was causing it, I just want to clarify in case it comes up on.
Of course, no, but clarify the question for me. So you're asking if he was on drugs while making the will?
Yeah, if it was something causing his insane delusion, like not a mental disorder, but it was like a drug, would that count as being insane delusion?
Well, if he was on a drug, right, to begin with, you might even end up failing the 3 elements to begin with. But yeah, if you kind of have the under influence of drugs and then that drug is causing some type of delusion in which, you know, you're making your will differently than what you would have, then you would raise that issue as well.
Thank you.
Cool. And here's what we'll do too after each section. I'll kind of take like 2-3 questions, and then if you have any more on that section, again, just write them down, and then, you know, we can answer them at the end. All right, so let's now get into intent. All right, let's see if I can get some new faces. There's some of these non-faces here. Let's see who we got. Cindy, you there, Cindy?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
What's up? How you doing?
Good, how are you?
It's been a while.
I know.
Yeah. All right, so for intent, 9 times out of 10, intent is gonna be a slam dunk argument, or it's going to be an in-depth argument. What do you think?
I think it's going to be an in-depth argument.
9 times out of 10, intent, guys, is going to be a slam dunk argument. Really quick. It's all right. You know, it's 50-50 toss up. Who knows? But look, it's usually really quick. It's super straightforward. There's not really, you know, much to do here. Let's look at our folder system. For intent, you have 2 sections, your general rule, and then you have destroying intent. Who's going to want to destroy intent? How do you categorize that person? Anybody can answer that one. Who's going to be arguing no capacity? Who's going to be arguing a destroying intent doctrine?
The person who wants to be the beneficiary but isn't.
Exactly. And from that perspective, the person who doesn't want this will to be valid, right? So when you're trying to like organize the parties to see who's arguing what, that can kind of help the way that you think about this is that whoever is in a position, so like Frank doesn't want that will to be valid right before because he was left out. And if that will is not valid, then the assets will pass through
Intestacy.
intestacy. And if it passes through intestacy, Frank
Will take.
exactly. So make sure you're kind of connecting the dots in that way. So let's just use Frank for now. Frank will want to destroy intent if he can. But again, look at our general rule. T must have had present testamentary intent at the time of execution. This is evident by words of giving dispositive gifts, testamentary words such as executor, and or words of revocation. Again, and it says right there in the blueprint too, intent is typically a slam dunk, right? Whenever the testator is clearly making a testamentary instrument that is giving a gift, revoking a gift, modifying a gift, appointing an executor of the will, this is a slam dunk argument for intent. The only time intent is really an issue to discuss in detail is when destroying intent theory is triggered. Be sure to know all of the approaches and rules for undue influence because it is the most tested by far. So again, typically a one-liner unless intent, you have to go into destroying intent. So let's now get into that. You have 3 different ways to destroy intent. And for some of you guys, I think for Berger, you might've had a few more. Also too, like I'm totally cool sharing with you guys my law school outline that I had. Again, I took Berger. So for those taking Berger, I can give that to you guys at the end. But the top 3 ways are undue influence, fraud, and mistake. And with that, fraud and mistake aren't tested too often. It's really undue influence. Let's focus our attention there. From a big picture first, right? Let's stick with Cindy. Cindy, can you give me what the gist and feel of undue influence is? You there, Cindy?
Yeah.
Don't be looking at the outline. Don't be looking at the blueprint, right? You know undue influence. Talk to me. What's undue influence? You can use the title.
So basically, if they were influenced by some other factor, some other person
to
create their will and leave somebody out.
And yeah, you don't have to do all of those things, but just something with the will. There you go. Cindy, please, please, please put me in your will every day. I'm knocking on your door. Cindy, please put me in your will. I want to be in your will. And you put me in your will. Undue influence? What do you think?
Yes.
I still think probably no. It's going to be a little bit of a toss-up. We'll have some elements going back and forth on that. But do remember that not all influence is undue influence, right? At the end of the day, if I'm like, hey, mom, put me in that will, right? You're not going to be like, oh, that's undue influence. So make sure every time you see some influence, you don't jump the gun and just say it's undue. You have the elements, right? So you got to go through them. So we have a hypo for it, but let's quickly just get familiar with the elements. I have the mnemonic here, SOAR, S-O-A-R, for the prima facie case. And that is susceptibility, opportunity, active participation, and unnatural result, okay? So for the bar, you need to know the 3 different approaches, which is prima facie case, the case law presumption, and the statutory presumption. For your classes, you really only need to typically know the prima facie case. That's all we're going to focus on today. But if for those other people, those bar takers, make sure you look at case law and statutory. And again, this hypo with the answers, you'll be able to read through those explanations on those tests as well later on. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our hypo for intent. So this is intent section, question number 1. All right, Bishop, for all my New Girl fans out there, is a 2L at Legally Fit Law School. Bishop's mom, Michelle, is a 70-year-old woman. Michelle is a widow and her only living relative is her son, Bishop. Over the past 10 years, Michelle has been completely dependent on Bishop for food, shelter, and companionship. Bishop is worried that his mom won't be alive for much longer, so he urges her to create a will so that she can distribute her assets as she wishes. Bishop reminds her to create a will at least once a week for the past 3 months. Michelle agrees to make a will so long as Bishop drafts it for her. Michelle hates legal documents. Bishop instructs his mom to give him a list of all the people she wants to make a gift to and what their gift will be. Michelle then gives Bishop a list that says, Bishop shall receive my entire estate. Bishop then drafts a will accordingly. Michelle then signs the will. Will Bishop's gift, and therefore the entire will, be void because of undue influence? Cindy, quick answer, what you think, yes or no? That's not quick.
Sorry, no.
No, Shavi, what you think?
I think no as well.
All right, I think both of you girls are right. I think it's gonna be no. So let's get into it, right? We're gonna go through the elements. First off, susceptibility, okay? Shavi, take this element. Was there susceptibility? Is this element going to be met?
I would say yes, there's susceptibility to undue influence. She's 70. Her only living relative is her son, Bishop, and he's the one telling her to make the will.
Mm-hmm. Right? Even in articulation with me, again, we want to make sure we use all those facts. So that part, want to get all those points, completely dependent on Bishop for food, shelter, and companionship for the past 12 years. She's old, right? So boom, use all that stuff. That's going to be your argument. This is just a reminder, and this is playing to the emotions of a student. Just because the overall outcome might be no undue influence doesn't mean you won't conclude that certain elements are in fact met, right? So just remember that. And so susceptibility could go either way. At the end of the day too, the argument is just because you're 70 years old doesn't mean, you're susceptible to undue influence. You can kind of throw that in there quickly as well. Next, opportunity, right? Let's go with Sasha. You there, Sasha? Ramos.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, awesome. So Sasha, opportunity, is that element going to be met? What's the argument there? And what are we looking for?
He was like present. He was in her life. So
Exactly. But right there, that's going to be a classic example of getting maybe one or two of those points, because that whole, you translated some facts into then that like summary. Give me the cold hard facts for how, we know he was there. And while you're thinking about that, remember the element is we have to prove that the person we're saying unduly influenced essentially had an opportunity to do so. Don't overthink it. You already know it. What did you use to say he was there?
He's her only living relative.
Okay. What else?
She's completely dependent on him for her basic needs.
Exactly. And so from that, we can infer what?
That he had opportunity.
Exactly. And before we get to that conclusion, from that, we can infer that he sees her very often. And because he sees her very often, boom, there's your opportunity. So good. So keep that in mind, Sasha. Right immediately, I can see you can get the right outcome, but make sure you're showing what facts you're translating into that outcome and include those facts. All right, so next element. Let's go back to Nicole, active participation. What's your argument's gonna be for that section? And do you think the element is met, yes or no?
I would say that the son was active participant in influencing his mother to create a will, because he asked her at least once a week for the past 3 months. Mm-hmm. And also he drafted the will.
There we go. I mean, and first off, everybody take note of that because that is classic legally fit analysis right there. Like stated the operative part of the rule that he actively participated, gave us a because, and then gave us the verbatim facts that went to that issue. So that's exactly how it's done. Great job. And yeah, you would then say the active participation element is met. And again, don't let your emotion, even though you feel like he didn't unduly influence her, you can't let your emotion get in the way of the actual analysis of the element. Here, there would be. Okay. And the other one too, that you would want to include in there, Nicole, also is even starting off with, he urges her to create a will. So it started off with that. He urged her to create a will. Then he reminded her at least once a week for the 3 months, and he's the one that drafted it. Boom, done. Okay. All right, moving on. And then last element is going to be unnatural result. Miriam, unnatural result. Is this element going to be met or not? Give me the arguments. Give me the analysis.
Okay, hold on.
Nicole just threw you to alley-oop. You just got to slam dunk it now.
So Michelle would give her assets to Bishop regardless, because he is her only son. He has been her only companion for the past 10 years. He's provided for her, and she's been completely dependent on him. And there are no facts to suggest that he had any way of unduly influencing her, because he just wanted her to make a will and devise what she wanted to whoever. He did not say specifically, give your assets to me. He just said make a list, and that's what she did. So it's not an unnatural result.
Perfect. And I'm like, look, did a lot of great things in there. You incorporated that. There are no facts to suggest that he engaged in any foul play, right, in doing this. He is, and then to kind of help you find that wording, when in doubt, when you're trying to find that wording, just use the rule. So you kind of start off and you're kind of like figuring out how to word it, and just say, here, Bishop is going to argue that it was a natural result for her to leave everything to him because da-da-da-da, okay? So element is not met, so that means our overall conclusion, Miriam, is what?
Our overall conclusion is that she was not unduly influenced.
And if there's no undue influence issue, that means
the
what?
will is valid.
Oh,
no, sorry. There is intent. There is testamentary intent.
So always important to conclude, but also not to over conclude, because you could still have issues with capacity and or formalities. But awesome. Cool. So that is undue influence. Again, that's like your most tested destroying intent doctrine. That's intent, pretty straightforward. Any questions on intent?
I have a question about the unnatural result.
Yeah.
Could you argue that there was an unnatural result because she probably would have never drafted a will in the first place because she hates anything that has to do with legal papers?
Yeah, so that's again where, man, so much of the bar and essay writing in general, it's like I really look at it and treat it like a game, right? These teachers, these professors, these bar graders, they're not looking for that like super creative argument. They're writing this exam with the thought process that you're going to catch certain facts and certain arguments and then deliver that. And then now what I'll share with you is that in my years of experience of analyzing wills, I have not seen an argument where it's like unnatural result came down to like, well, otherwise she would not have created a will. So again, I would put that in the category of something that like, if it quickly came to me, like maybe I'll like squeeze it in, but it's just that mentality that can overall get us in trouble. Because if for every single analysis, we're having these extra thoughts and we're just squeezing it in, what's going to end up happening? Somebody? If for all your different analysis in your essay, right, issue number 1, issue number 2, you're having all these extra thoughts and you're just squeezing in that last little bit of argument for each one of those, what's going to happen? Megan?
You're going to get, well, I don't want to, you're going to get deducted points.
And I won't even say that's necessarily the case, because the way it works is like typically if you have the points, you know, they'll find it. If it's fluff, they'll just kind of like look past it, unless you have a crazy professor sometimes that will actually, I want to deduct for that. The main issue that it's going to cause is that you will not finish your essay on time, right? And so remember, this is a game, right? Think of it like playing Mario, right? You don't ever get like every single coin when you jump over that little like hump. You just need to get most of it. But if you spend all your time like going back trying to get that 1 point, those 2 points, you're not going to make it through the level in time. Same thing with these essays. So in general, kind of keep that rule of thumb that whenever you guys have these thoughts of like, oh, what about this creative argument? And if you have a sense for like, oh, this is creative, chances are you should probably not have it. Right? The only time in which you have more space for creativity is when you have an essay and there's very, very few topics to talk about. You see this a lot in con law, where there's just like the whole essay is commerce clause. So it's like, shit, let me get creative and let me kind of go into some further detail. But when you got these like racehorse exams and you have these like, you know, mini issues exams, your goal and objective is to hit those main major points that you know are speaking loudly, right? And get through the entire thing and finish your essay. That speaks the most, as opposed to like, ooh, Megan came up with a creative argument on that. You know, there's no brownie points, there's no extra points in that sense. So great questions, awesome. Let's now move on. If you have any other 10 questions, just save for the end, because 10's not that important. Or it's important, but it's not that difficult. Let's move now to formalities. Yeah, and I want to get through formalities, and then we'll see if we want to take a quick little break. This is a classic Legally Fit thing. You know, I want to squeeze in all this information in a short time. So we'll see how you guys are doing on endurance. But let's do formalities. So this is the most tested section. Well, and I'm getting looks right now because I'm not giving you guys a break. Do you guys need a break right now? No? Good to go? Okay, cool. We've been really talking about making sure we have breaks, because I'm notorious for going like 4 hours with no breaks. It's not good for anybody, so we're gonna do better. All right, so for formalities, big picture on this section, let's get to the blueprint and let's look at our folder system. Hopefully you guys are kind of getting the flow for how a session works. What's gonna be our folder system, our next level breakdown for formalities, and you can tell by just looking at the blueprint. Somebody tell me. It's going to be, hint, hint, the sections in gray.
A typed or a handwritten will?
Exactly. You have two main sections under formalities. You have a tested typed will, and you have holographic handwritten will. Okay. And so as soon as you get into formalities, you need to decide, am I going to be analyzing one or both of these? Sometimes you just need to go directly to one. Sometimes you might analyze both. Now, let's break this down as quickly as possible. Sometimes this is tough, but like I think I can teach it so well where we don't have to make it this issue and then solve the issue. Like, let's just get straight to understanding it. So first off, let's look at our elements, and I want you to see how I break it down. And I think you'll best see that by going back to your charts and looking at formalities, big picture. It looks like. Okay. Miriam, what are the shared elements for both a typed and handwritten will?
That the
What you think for? I need you to look at the chart.
Oh, where's the chart? Oh, writing and sign.
Writing and sign. What's the element that only an attested will has?
A witness.
The witness requirement. And then holographic, the material provisions have to be in the testator's handwriting. So this is something novel. Again, if you're taking a professor, you kind of want to give it to them the way they want it. But for the sake of understanding it, what I did was kind of wrap all of the witness related elements into this big element of witness requirement. So this is going to be great for facilitating your understanding, but do know you may like organize it slightly different for your professor. All right, for the bar, you can definitely keep it in this witness requirement and break it down how you want. You get a little bit more flexibility as long as it's clean and clear for the bar. All right, so let's start off with a tested will, or actually let's go through quickly. shared elements, writing and signed. For writing, it must be in writing. Obviously, for attested, that writing has to be essentially typed, and then for holographic, it's going to be handwritten, but it's still a writing. Next one, signed. Does the will always have to be signed by the actual testator, Miriam?
Yes.
No. It can be signed by someone else at T's direction and in his presence, right? And so this is something that's going to be good, again, going into bar prep for you to remember across the board for all subjects, is that the signature requirement is a lot more relaxed than we think prior to law school. We always think it's like, got to be you, it's got to be a formal signature. But even think back to like contracts, right? And 2205, and it's like they tell us there, it can even be like your initials that constitute a signature, or the logo and letterhead. So very relaxed, and that's pretty consistent amongst all the areas of law. So again, it could be signed by T or by someone else, but it has to be at T's direction and in his presence. All right, so that's writing and signed. Those are the same. Let's now get into attested will witness requirement. We have 3 things there, okay? And let's not make this complicated. Testator had to do one of 3 things. Leave it just as that. One of those 3 things, right? He had to acknowledge the will, sign the will, or the most idiotic one, acknowledge his signature on the will. Like, who the hell does that? Like, either you're doing the will or you're signing it. You're not saying, this is my signature on the will. It's really just acknowledging the will, whatever. I'm not going to argue him on that one. But those are your 3. You got to do one of those 3. The next part that you're looking for is what? Whether you're looking at the chart or the blueprint, somebody tell me, what's the next thing you're looking for after the testator did one of those 3 things? Your next question is, Nicole?
I don't know if I know the answer for this one. After they go through the witness requirement.
No. You're still in the witness requirement after the testator did one of those 3 things. So pulled up my will and said, hey, this is my will.
Mm-hmm. Is it witnesses were jointly present?
And that's it, exactly. And let's go ahead and make sure we understand that. I did one of my 3 things. Were my witnesses jointly present while I did one of those 3 things? Usually, again, for your professors and other bar materials, you'll see those 2 as one long element. And the legally fit way to make things simple is to break it up, because you're really having to analyze 2 different things within that. One, did testator do one of those 3 things? And then, were the witnesses jointly present while he did one of those 3 things? Right? We have our rules in our blueprint for what it means to be jointly present. You have the common law test. That means you had to be in the line of vision. So if I'm the testator, Nicole and Victoria are my witnesses. They had to be in my line of vision, right, while I did one of those 3 things. But if I acknowledged my will and Victoria was on the other side of the door, is the line of vision test satisfied, Victoria?
No.
No, because you are not in my line of vision. However, under the modern conscious presence test, it expands it not just to eyesight, but to all of your senses. So if you are essentially in earshot, you can hear me, or maybe you can take a shower and I can smell you. You're that close, right? There, the conscious presence test is going to be met. And we'll say it's because you're funky. Maybe you got that YSL perfume on, you know, that works too. So conscious presence test expands it. As long as you're in the senses of the other person, that element will be met. Okay. And then the last one, that's one that's super easy. 2 witnesses sign before the testator dies. That's easy, right? You don't got to like overthink that one. You got to make sure you still analyze it. Okay. So let's now go into the formalities hypo. Let's do the first one. Okay. Read through it again. So now we have formalities. We have question number 1. Terry is a widow with 2 adult children, Sam and Debbie. Terry wants to create a will. She opens up her MacBook and types up the following. Formalities. Are we in attested or holographic? Attested, right? I see everybody mouthing attested. Yes, attested. This is my will. I give all my money to my son, Sam. I give all my real property to my daughter, Debbie. Anything else I have, they can split. Terry prints the document. She takes the document to Naomi's house. Naomi is her neighbor and her best friend. Terry sits in the living room with Naomi and Naomi's husband, Hal. Terry tells them both that this is her will and she is now signing it. Terry then signed the will. Terry told them that she would really appreciate it if they would be witnesses to her will and sign it also. Naomi immediately reads through the will and signs it at the bottom. Hal said to Terry, "Not right now, girl. I'm watching the game." 4 hours later, Hal was ready to sign the will. By this time, Naomi had left the house to go pick up dinner. Naomi is no longer there. That's how you want to like go through fluff as you're reading it in a fact pattern. See how I translated that? By this time, Naomi had left the house to go pick up dinner. It don't matter if she went to go pick up dinner. I just know that she's no longer there. Hal, distracted by highlights of the football game that was playing on the television, was unaware of the gifts bequest in the will, but signed it anyway and said that he was honored to be a witness to her will. Had the formalities for a valid will been met? What a nice fact pattern. So let's do a quick, I don't know why I can't see your guys's, close this. No. Participants. There we go. Participants, let me see a quick thumbs up if you think that the formalities are met. Thumbs up if you think the formalities are, thumbs up on the Zoom, like how you do it, where, there you go, thumbs up, got a couple, okay. Formalities are met. Mariam, interesting. You guys think formalities are met, okay. Maybe I haven't been teaching you guys as well as maybe, I don't know, we'll see. Who thinks formalities is not met? Who thinks formalities are not met? So go ahead and erase, I'll clear all. And if you think formalities are not met, let's see who thinks formalities are not met. Nobody thinks formalities are not met. Well, you got
my thumbs up back.
Wait, so you're going with formalities are not met?
Yeah.
You fell for
I think they're not.
You fell for my bait. All the ones that put thumbs up that the formalities are met are correct. Right? I was just messing with you guys to test your confidence in knowing the law, and all of the elements are going to be met. So let's kind of run through it quickly. What we have here, guys, is a situation where you have to analyze the elements, but I also gave you some additional things. Now, this can get difficult sometimes to like fit into your analysis. So a lot of times you want to just run through your elements still, and then just try to leave a section to clearly analyze some of the things that I intentionally made an issue. What are some things that I intentionally made an issue that are kind of novel to this fact pattern?
I forgot their names just that quickly, but someone leaving while the other one signed, so not both of them being present.
There we go, exactly, during the sign. But that one you could talk within the element of jointly present. How about the additional issue that Hal was unaware of the gifts, right? And he just signed it anyway. He didn't look at it. He just, all right, whatever, I'll sign it. One who doesn't know the rule or is not confident in knowing the rule is then going to get swayed by something like that, where again, I pulled this directly from a past bar exam where they put this in there to trip you up. You had to catch that and say, well, that is not an element of some level of knowledge of the contents of the will in order to be a witness. So again, they're testing not only your knowing the elements, but you not getting tripped up by the intentional trip ups. So quickly going through the elements. Did T do one of three things? What did the testator, Terry, do, Rosie?
She took the will to them and acknowledged that it was her will. And I lost the fact pattern, but I think she acknowledges that it was her signature too.
No, she didn't do the weird, quirky one of acknowledging the signature. She just did, this is my will, and then she actually
signed.
Perfect. So she did two of these three things. Then we have to see, were the witnesses jointly present during that? And were they present under the line of vision test?
Yes, they were, because it happened at their house.
In the living room, right in front of both of them. The facts tell us that. And if the line of vision test is, can we just assume and know that the conscious presence test is met?
Yes.
If the line of vision is met, guys, conscious presence is always going to be met. But it's the times where sometimes line of vision isn't, where conscious presence may. Okay. So that is met. And then the next element is 2 witnesses sign before testator dies. Boom, they both sign. So again, to Shavi's point, the other way they're trying to trip you up is like, oh, she left for dinner, right? That's the classic way that they try to trip you up on formalities, is that they didn't sign at the same time. But again, that is not a requirement. That is not an element. Okay, so that is formalities. I want you guys to do all of those formalities, hypos, by yourself. For the sake of getting through today, I don't want to spend too much time here. If we have time at the end, we can come back to it. One thing I do want to say is, do not forget about the additional theories or doctrines within an attested will. So if you're doing your big picture folder system breakdown of the attested will section, at least regarding the legally fit blueprint, what else goes within that section? You have the elements for a proper will. And what else, Megan? There's 2 other sections.
Sorry, I lost you there. What was the question?
So what are the major sections within a tested will? So yeah, there's the elements, and then there's 2 other major sections.
I don't know. I don't know.
So look at the tested will. Are you in the blueprint?
Is this the big picture?
The outline?
Yeah. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So the witness requirement? No.
No. So we're out. So you have the elements that's in that nice teal color. That's one of the major sections. What else is in a teal color under attested? Somebody help her out?
The harmless error rule and the interested witnesses.
Yeah, is that not in teal for you, Megan? It might be because.
I don't think I'm looking at the right thing right now.
Okay, but yeah, so we're on the.
I got it.
All right, cool. So yeah, we have the harmless error rule, guys, and the interested witness. Really quick, running through that. For a harmless error rule, that's basically saying all of that crap we just learned about the witness requirement, even if it's not met, if you can use, or you can try to use the harmless error rule to still find the will valid, again, even though the witness requirement fails. Nicole, do you think they're going to let you use the harmless error rule to fix an issue with it not being signed?
Yes.
Hell no. How do we know Nicole didn't make this will, or, somebody off the street like, yep, this is, Bill Gates' will. He left everything to me. He ain't signed it though, but harmless error rule. We know. So look, writing and signed, you cannot use the harmless error rule. You can't get around writing and signed with this, but the witness requirement, you can. Okay. And the interested witness. An interested witness is one who is both a witness and a beneficiary. This, guys, can always be a difficult issue to spot on the exam, because there are no other facts given to you other than you catching the fact that he is listed as a beneficiary, and then it also says that he is a witness. So you have to be very mindful, which is why you want to have a checklist every time you go through a tested will of elements. Do I need to talk about harmless error rule? And do I need to consider interested witness? Without that checklist, it can be difficult to catch that interested witness issue. It's pretty simple. If they are interested witness, there is a presumption of undue influence, and then that party is just going to try to rebut that presumption. No, I didn't influence him. I just happened to be chosen to be both, right? And as long as there's no foul play, he will in fact take his gift. But if he cannot rebut the presumption, then it is presumed that this interested witness influenced this person and therefore shall not take. Okay. And then also don't forget the small little caveat rule to that, which is also common with interested witness. Start, if you can, in your blueprint, that interested witnesses are always resolved by future codicils. Okay, so again, don't have to like necessarily fit that into like the concrete understanding now. Just star that, make sure that makes sense later at some point. The hypos that I have in here will help with that. So boom. Okay. Lastly, formalities, right? I was making these hypos at the Marina Del Rey Marriott the other day, and I actually ended up having a little conversation in the courtyard with, that's like my workspace now, the Marriott, with some like random person from Indiana. And she was like, "What you working on?" And I was like, "Wills and Trust." And she was like, "Well, how do I make a will?" And I was like, funny enough, you can actually pull out a piece of paper and make a will right now. So just remember, that's how easy it is to make a will. You can do a holographic handwritten will by taking out anything, writing on it, making sure you have, you know, testamentary intent by saying, "I'm giving this gift," or whatever it may be, and signing it. Okay. So it's pretty much that simple. Do you need a date to make it a valid will, whether it be holographic or attested? Elijah? See, guys, too, I'll tell you guys right now, if you guys want to be called on, I just naturally gravitate to all the beautiful faces that are showing their faces on the Zoom. So if I don't get to everybody else, you got to turn your cameras on. But Elijah, you there?
Yeah. So holographic will does not need to be dated to be valid.
Exactly. It does not, right? Again, that's something on the bar that they've done one time. I remember this one, it was like July 2017. And I had my bar takers and they went in there and they had a wills exam. And it was like, oh my God, it like specifically said it was not dated. And then like so many students, not too many legally fit ones, of course, were just like, oh my God, like was the will invalid? And it's just like, no, you know the rule. There's no date requirement. Don't make it one, right? Just because they're throwing that in there. So no date requirement. Look out for that little trick. All right, so that is it for formalities. 12:23. Let's just take like a little 5-6 minute break and we'll come back at 12:30 and we'll pick up with revocation. Okay, so come back at 12:30 and we'll pick up with revocation.
Can I ask a question really quick? No.
Let's do it when we come back.
Okay.
Write it down so you don't forget.
Okay.
All right. Who had that question?
That was me.
Go for it, Shavi.
It was just quick. So do we discuss both line of vision and conscious presence?
Yes, typically you're gonna go ahead and just do both. Yep.
Okay.
And then if it's like super, like if line of vision is met and you spend your analysis really doing all the facts there, it's almost like a C above quick for conscious presence. And there's times where line of vision is not met and you gotta like really go into detail on both as to why one's met and one's not. So spend your time accordingly, but yeah, always discuss both.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. All right, so let's get back into it, guys and gals. So I got some heat from my team members, and they said I can't just show favoritism to all the ones with their cameras on. So all these black boxes, putting you guys on notice right now. I'm focusing on you guys in this next 30 minutes, 45. We'll see. I'm trying to get you guys out on time, but all the other people, I'm calling on you in this next section. All right. So we are actually done with the first level concept. Remember, first level concepts were creation, revocation, saving will, saving a gift, stuff happens, protection of spouse, children, other, right? We just finished creation. Let's do some quick recap questions. All right. So Elijah, can you please, let me get my recap questions. What are the 3 elements of creation? You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So let's see. The 3 elements of creation are capacity, intent, and formalities.
There we go. Boom. Capacity, intent, formalities. Got to know that. Get it down. Good. Next. Thank you for getting on the camera. I see we got some more faces. Cindy, Jesse. Jesse, let's go with you. What are the 2 elements of capacity?
Legal and mental.
Legal. And how old you got to be?
18.
How many elements did we have for that mental capacity test?
I think 3.
3. It was 3 of them. Good. Moving on. Yep, that was right. Let's go with Charlie. Charlie, can you tell me what is the most tested theory for destroying intent?
For destroying intent, it's gonna be is it undue influence? Yeah, undue influence.
Exactly. There we go. We got the other ones: fraud, mistake. Obviously, go through your rules. Be comfortable with them as well. Undue influence is what we said. Maria, what are the elements of the prima facie case for undue influence? You there, Maria?
Yes. Yeah. They're susceptibility, opportunity, active participation, and unnatural result.
Exactly. There we go. The mnemonic is SOAR. Okay. SOAR. Good. SOAR. Next question is, you have to know the elements for an attested will. What are the other 2 important sections that fall under attested wills? Michelle.
The harmless error rule and interested witnesses.
Exactly. All right. Last, is the date required for a valid creation of an attested or holographic will? We talked about this one. Tony, is the date required for valid creation of an attested or holographic will? You there? All right, we're gonna move on to the next one. Lisa, you there? For those that don't know, I have the most supportive grandmother in the world, and she attends most of my Zoom calls on a black screen the entire time. Tony is my grandmother. Thought she was gonna know that question. Lisa, from Tony. Oh, there you are. You're gonna put LOL. Oh, all right. Lisa. Uh-oh, the ones on the bottom. See, Mama T, Tony, you even started a trend. Let's go with Natalie.
No, you don't need a date for a will.
Oh, no.
You don't need a date.
You don't need a date. I forgot what the question was. Like, I need a date. What you talking about? You don't need a date.
I had a question though about that.
Go for it.
There's people that usually have multiple wills. And usually once you create a new will, it revokes the old will. Well,
Yeah.
how would you know which is the newest will if they don't date it?
So for today, what we're just not doing is going into that detail of
Got it.
when dates are helpful and important. And so, yes, there are the situations in which dates are then needed to figure out a situation in which you have all these documents. So what you don't want to confuse that with, though, is that a date is a requirement for will valid creation. But yes, when you have like multiple wills, some dated, some undated, you do have those additional rules for that. And again, I'm going to give you guys my law school outline, and I'll have some more of those detailed rules that you need to know for your classes. For the bar, you guys don't have to worry about that. They don't really test that issue. But it's really just more so logic. Like if you have one dated and one undated, go with the dated, or two dated, you know, the most recent in time works, etc. All right. So let's move on now and let's get into our next first level concept, right? What's our next first level concept? Megan? You're gonna get this folder system down with this blueprint before the session's over.
Trying to teach you, but okay, revocation of a will.
Revocation, exactly. That's our next big section. Charlie, there's 3 different ways to revoke a will. What are those 3 different ways to revoke a will?
Revocation by subsequent writing,
Mm-hmm.
Physical acts or operation of law.
Exactly. So that's going to be our folder system, our big picture right there. As far as the intro, I'll tell you guys, revocation is extremely important to be, to understand it very well and be ready to quickly discuss it, spot the issue. You need to be very confident with revocation. Comes up very often. Okay. So you have those 3. Let's break down each one. First one, revocation by subsequent writing. Right. Intro on that, pretty straightforward. It's self-explanatory in the title. You're revoking by making a subsequent writing. All right. Another folder system question. This one we'll do with Charlie. What is our next kind of step? What are our big sections within revocation by subsequent writing?
Okay, so you said the folder system, right? So codicil, express, and implied.
Exactly. So let me explain why each of those are there. At the end of the day, this is revocation by what? Subsequent writing. Any subsequent writing with regards to a will is going to be considered a codicil. Do not, get confused with codicil and what that means or what it does. All it is a future writing. And it's almost like calling it will number 2, right? But at the end of the day, a codicil has to meet the same elements of creation that a normal will has to make. So a very quick example of that is I write a will that gives everything to Tony and Monique. Then I write 2 weeks later on a piece of paper, I revoke my gift to Tony. I want Monique to take everything and I sign it. So what have I created with that note that I wrote, let's say on a sticky note on that day? What have I created? Charlie?
A codicil.
And what kind?
What do you mean?
It could be attested or holographic, just like regular creation.
Oh, okay, yeah. So yeah, it's it would be because you said you typed it. It would be an attested.
Yeah, so for this one, I said that the additional one later on, I hand wrote that one out.
Oh yeah, okay, holographic.
It'll be holographic. And you guys take that note if you want to. Most fact patterns have that pattern where the first will may or may not be holographic or attested. They can kind of flip-flop on that. But usually codicils are on the go right later on, and those are typically holographic. So you're typically going to be analyzing codicils under the holographic formalities. That's that. All right. After you get over whether or not that writing can even be a valid writing to consider with the will as a valid codicil, then you have to look into how did it revoke, right? With subsequent writing, it could either be express or implied, right? So if the language of the writing says something very specific and explicit, like I revoke my gift, then that's going to be express. Okay, it has to be sufficient language, and star that is where they typically try to trip you up. Okay, next is total versus partial. That's super intuitive. If you're revoking the entire will, then that's total. If you're only doing a part, then that's partial. Okay, if the will only has one gift and you're revoking that one gift, it is total, right? Pretty straightforward. Next, implied. Implied revocation is when you are making an inconsistent gift, okay? I give everything to my mom, then 2 weeks later, I write something that says, I give everything to Tony. Well, the one to mom has to be revoked through implied revocation because you can't do both, they're inconsistent. So the one to Tony is going to revoke the gift to mom. Even if it was something like, I give my car to my mom, then later I wrote, I give everything to Tony. Again, everything is inconsistent with giving something to mom. As long as it's inconsistent, implied revocation. And then again, it could be total or partial. All right, what we're gonna do is go through all of these really quickly. Well, it's only just one more big one. It's physical act, and then we'll do our hypo. So let's go into then the second one. Or before we move on, any questions on revocation by subsequent writing? Straightforward. Cool. Don't forget, whenever you do subsequent writing revocation, you can't just jump into express or implied. You gotta first do, is this a valid codicil? Okay. All right, revocation by physical act. Again, self-explanatory in title. You are revoking by doing a physical act. So let's go through the elements. First one, you need a sufficient physical act. Some things include burning, tearing, cancellations, destroying, or obliterating, okay? Testator writing null and void on top of an attested will is considered a physical act as well. But there you go. Those are the physical acts that work. Next element, just like signature, it can be revoked by the testator or at T's direction and in his presence, one or the two. And then simultaneous intent to revoke, right? So let's say you are one of those, very hippie, earthy, universe, right, type of people. You make your will, you're sitting there on your desk one day and you're looking at your will and you got your morning coffee and then you put your coffee down and your coffee spills on your will. And you're like, oh, the universe told me that this will should no longer be. I should create something new. Is that going to be revocation by physical act? Let's do Kareen.
Revocation by physical act, is that what you said?
Is that that pattern that I just gave you, is that going to be sufficient for revocation by physical act?
Yes.
The answer is going to be no, right? Is there a physical act? Yeah, if you spilled the coffee on there and you can't read anything anymore, you would say like destroying it in that way would be a sufficient physical act. So that element is met. Was it done by me, revoked by me? The answer to that is also yes. But it's the third element that would fail here, guys, and that is the simultaneous intent to revoke. Did I have the intent to revoke at the time the coffee spilled?
Okay, no, you didn't. It just happened.
Exactly. Okay. I formed the intent essentially after the act, and that is not simultaneous intent to revoke. And really, you can kind of reword that in your head, that element. Simultaneous intent to revoke means you had the intent at the time of the physical act occurring. Okay, you can write that down. You had the intent at the time that the physical act occurs. Oh, actually, you don't have to write that down. It literally, that is the definition that I have here in the blueprint, so we're good. All right, so I think we're ready now to go into some hypos. The last little thing you have is revocation by operation of law. That is the third section. And typically you see that by divorce, right? A previous spouse is automatically cut from the will by operation of law after the divorce or annulment. All right. So let's go ahead and do hypo number 1. All right, here we go. Tina creates a valid will that gives half of her estate to her son, Sony, and half of her estate to her daughter, Delilah. This will is stored at her attorney's office in Beverly Hills. 2 years later, Tina gets into a huge fight with her son, Sony, because he decided to be a comedian instead of following his family's pressure to become a lawyer or doctor. Around that same time, Tina got into a huge fight with her daughter, Delilah, for marrying outside of their race. Uh-oh. Tina is driving in the car one day when she has a sudden epiphany. She then finds an envelope in the car and writes the following on the back of it. Because my son Sonny and my daughter Delilah have disobeyed me, I specifically disinherit them. I now give all my property to my cousin Cassandra. Please tear up the previous will. Tina signs this envelope and puts it in a fresh envelope and mails it to her attorney. Once her attorney receives the letter, he reads it and immediately tears up the original will. Tina then dies. What claim does Sony, Delilah, and Cassandra have against Tina's estate? Yes. Look at that face, Megan. Yes, I know it's a whole lot going on in this fact pattern. I want you guys to see just in this fact pattern, we've put in so many issues, okay? And here's how you do this. One step at a time, right? Go through chronological order and look at what was done, what can be argued that might have been done, and what are your options. This is where that folder system comes in handy. So the question asks, what claims do Sony, Delilah, and Cassandra have against Tina's estate? So Jesse, what's the very first thing that we're gonna have to ask ourselves to even start determining what each of those 3 parties have with regards to this estate?
I was gonna go straight to the beginning. Well, it says it's a valid will, then intent.
No. So the very first thing you're going to start with was a valid will created to begin with, right? And so what we have here are the facts telling us that she created a valid will. Now, test tip: when your fact pattern on an essay or multiple choice tells you that they've created a valid will, you can still bring it up if you want, if it's an essay, but the idea is that you don't have to analyze it and critique it. You assume that it is valid. If it just said Tina created a will, what we have to do, go through the creation elements. So here we don't have to, but that would be the first heading, creation, and it would be met. Then all of the additional facts are around what, Jesse?
Is it a valid codicil?
That's not essentially what they're all around. They're all circling around another issue, a major issue.
Revocation?
Exactly. All of these facts are, no. And so look, that's where you want to kind of pull yourself out from, right, being a student and trying to figure this out and just kind of think about it. And it's she was driving in the car one day, she had this sudden epiphany, and she basically went through all of these steps and things to essentially remove Sonny, however you want to say it, and Delilah from the will. So all of this stuff is revocation. And so that's where we're going to be spending a lot of time in this fact pattern. All right. So I want you guys to take literally a minute, 2 minutes to look through the blueprint on what I've given you for revocation. And then we're going to come back and I want you to tell me whether or not it has been revoked. So take a minute or 2, look at your blueprint with the facts and tell me if it has. And I'm sure you guys have noticed at this point that there are answers. Do not cheat yourself and look at the answer. Please do it with your own brain power. Okay, go. All right. I know that's quick, but we want to get through this information. And again, all of this stuff is in detail, so you can go through it in detail later if you need. Let's jump into it. Let's get a quick for all those that do have the video on. Thumbs up if you think that there is valid revocation. Thumbs up if you think no revocation. Okay, got a few no revocation. Rosie's like, oh no, with a little baby thumb. I know your thumb bigger than that, girl. You better put that thumb up. All right, so let's go ahead and figure it out. I'll tell you right now that Cassandra is entitled to 100% of Tina's estate because there was a revocation by subsequent writing. But getting the right conclusion is not what's most important, right? It is getting all of the points. And so hopefully you guys realize that on this exam, you would have to analyze both revocation by subsequent writing and revocation by physical act. If you did it, doesn't matter if you get the right outcome, you didn't get all the points, and the points is what we matter or what we care about. So understand that this fact pattern triggered a great discussion of both. Let's start off with Lisa. So going into revocation by subsequent writing, what's the first thing that we need to discuss? And again, when in doubt, follow your folder system, follow your order of operation. Revocation by subsequent writing, first thing we need to discuss is? You there, Lisa? All right, Lisa has left the building temporarily, hopefully. Sasha. All right, let's go with Matt. Going back to my video people, you know, my trusty dusties.
Okay, yeah. So first look and subsequent creation, subsequent writing. It's a codicil, so you have to apply what we did earlier.
Exactly. Give me the quick answer. Is this a valid codicil?
Yeah, sorry, it is. It is. There is legal capacity. Mental capacity is fine. There's no facts to indicate that capacity is not there. There was intent, and all the formalities for a holographic will are met.
For a holographic will. So again, in there, right, you want to probably just get to the point that it doesn't matter that it was on an envelope. That will suffice as a writing. It doesn't matter. Well, that's pretty much the only thing that you can say. It doesn't matter, but you will say it was signed and the material provisions were in her handwriting. So again, even when something is slam dunk, don't miss those slam dunk points. And yes, very good job, Matt. It is a valid codicil. Boom, let's move on. Shane, after we know we have a valid codicil within revocation by subsequent writing, the next thing we need to look at is whether the revocation was?
Whether it was valid.
Whether it was, look at your blueprint. What's the, like, I'm basically mixing those two sections into one, but after.
So you determine if there's a valid codicil, then was there a valid revocation?
Well, and I'm asking, was it express or was it
implied? Oh, express or implied, yeah.
And you essentially have to go through both. Is this going to be express revocation, yes or no?
Yes.
Does everybody agree with him? If you agree, raise your thumbs up. Okay. Now, I want you guys to all turn them upside down. This is wrong. It is not express. That is going to be implied. So here's the language. I specifically disinherit them. Does that mean I'm revoking my, like, it's just very tough. Now, here's the thing is that I told you guys back then that revocation, express, it has to be really close. That's typically where they want to trip you up. The best thing that you can have is I revoke my gift to this person, or I take away my gift, something along those lines. But when it's not something super specific like that, you want to raise an issue. Now, I'll give you guys the creative freedom to conclude either way if you want, but I'll tell you, lean on the side that I'm telling you based off of what I've read, and just know that that's typically what they're trying to trigger in your brain. Whenever you don't see the words I revoke in a subsequent writing, just make the argument, if you can, why that's insufficient to amount to express. And at the end of the day, do you need it to be expressed under these facts? Definitely not, because this is at the very least going to be what, Shane?
this will be a revocation either way. Because there is
even if it's not expressed, it will for sure be
implied.
Why?
By some kind of inconsistent terms in the second.
Well, that sounds very vague. Some kind of facts that was in there. Tell me what it is.
You have another codicil that's saying something entirely different than the first one. So you have.
Somebody, okay, we're gonna go Nicole. Nicole, give me a specific fact. What is it?
The fact that the language, the codicil uses sufficient language. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's for implied, for express.
That's why it's implied.
For implied is to create a codicil that's inconsistent with the original or previous will.
And it is inconsistent because, so we back to where we were.
Because it's because she said disinherit instead of revoke, and then.
Okay.
I was gonna say, and then I don't know. No, I'm not sure.
What you got?
Is it inconsistent because the first will was giving 1/2 to each child, and now this new codicil is giving all to Cassandra? So
there we go. And again, I want you guys to make sure you're honing in, right, directly to what the strong fact is. When you're analyzing this, here's how this works. Essay formula to make it sound good. Our rule says that it has to be inconsistent with the original previous will. Here, T created a codicil that is inconsistent with the original will because, and you could do it in the way Matt actually did it. The original will gave half the estate to the son and half the estate to Cassandra. And the codicil said that it was giving everything to Cassandra. I meant Delilah if I said Cassandra twice there. The original will said half to Sonny and half to Delilah. And then the codicil said, I give everything, all of my property to my cousin Cassandra. That is inconsistent, okay? So again, that's where Shane and Nicole was trying to get you guys to hone in on that specific part, because the whole part about I specifically disinherit them, again, you can try to argue is inconsistent language, but again, you don't even need to rely on that when you have this strong inconsistent language of actually giving the property to somebody else. Also, last thing I'll say as far as a test tip is that when in doubt, make sure you always lead with your strongest arguments. And so when you guys are in session with me and I'm doing that like, nah, move on, it's not because those thoughts aren't valid, those thoughts aren't good, but I'm training you guys for, one, the attention span of a normal person in 2020, and for how a grader who's reading your exam in 1 to 2 minutes is looking at your exam. If you kind of like leave your strongest argument towards the end of your analysis, you're running the risk of them not seeing it. So you really want to train your brain and understand these patterns well enough to get straight to it in the beginning, so that way you don't have to play the game of like, oh, I hope he saw that great argument that was squeezed in the middle of my analysis. All right, so that is revocation by subsequent writing. It was implied. Again, it is likely not expressed because I specifically disinherit them. It's not expressed enough. Then we would get into, was the revocation total or partial? And essentially it would be total because it revoked all of the provisions, both of those, the half to Sonny and the half to Delilah. That was the entire thing, and it revoked both of those. So this would be total. Okay, so it was implied and total. Then we would get into, and hopefully you caught this because I think this was the hard one to catch, also revocation by physical act. Cindy, I want you to take me straight to the element that fails for revocation by physical act.
The simultaneous intent, like it wasn't at the same time that the act was committed?
No, that's not it. Try one more chance.
The revoked by the testator?
Exactly. And let's come back to your element that you thought was not met. Let me show you why it is met. Remember, you'd have to see if intent to revoke was essentially present at the time the physical act occurred. She had the intent when she wrote that letter, and it was clear that that was established. Then that letter was sent to the attorney, and then the attorney then later ripped it up. So at the time of the attorney ripping it up, there was the intent to destroy. So that element is fine. It is the revoked by T or at T's direction in his presence. You have two options. Was this revoked by Tina? Nope. Was this revoked by somebody else at her direction?
Yes.
Was it also in her presence?
No.
No. And so there you go. Whenever you have somebody else other than the testator doing it, you need both of those to be done at their direction and in their presence. That's why physical act fails. So if we had changed the facts that somehow that he received that letter and then he waited for her next visit to come into his office and then tore it up, then now all of a sudden physical act works. Okay. Also, additional facts. What if we took out the "I now give all my property to Cassandra" part of that letter? How does that change the outcome? Anybody can volunteer their answer on this. So based off of the conclusions that we made and how we've already analyzed, I want you to be able to work backwards and tell me, how does that change the outcome? Matt, I see your hand raised.
Would it be that now there's no implied revocation because now it's not inconsistent with the original will?
Yeah, and under the rest of these facts, if there's no...
Yes, then the first will would still stay in place because if both subsequent writing, revocation, physical act are not met, then we still would use the first will because there was never a revocation.
Exactly. Great. Make sure in practice and in studying, you're constantly kind of doing this like all the way down and then all the way back up. That really kind of gets your comfort level with analyzing things quickly and understanding the big picture. So great job there, Matt. All right, let's move on. It's 1 o'clock. So I want to keep you guys maybe for like another, I want to say like optimistically 20 minutes. So let's see if we can get that. Might go into like 30. One of the biggest...
Ask a real quick question.
Oh, yeah. New system stock. I remember I got to ask those moments for questions. Yes. Any questions on revocation? Yeah, Miriam, you have one, I think.
Yeah. So I highlighted the sudden epiphany because I was thinking of like the element for subsequent, and I think that's what Cindy, I think it was Cindy too. So if, let's say, she had the will with her and not at the lawyer's office, and like she had the epiphany and then ripped it up and then wrote it on the envelope, would that then be the subsequent like something's happening, that element?
The subsequent something's happening. Okay, so I'll just work with your hypo and tell you what the outcome will be. So you're saying the hypo is
A simultaneous intent to revoke.
Well, that element was already met.
Okay. I thought like the epiphany kind of went to that because she had like a outside epiphany, like.
Yeah, no, so like, I mean, essentially it's just like that epiphany then gave her the intent. So this element is met again because when did the physical act occur?
After the epiphany?
Yeah, but specifically, like, who did it? When did it happen? Like, you know.
So she had the epiphany, and then she ripped up the will, and then she wrote it on an envelope. In my hypo, is that that's what I'm saying?
Okay, so in your hypo, she had the epiphany.
Yeah, and then she had the will with her. It was not at the lawyer's office. The will is with her. She ripped it up.
And then that's it.
And then she wrote it on the envelope, and then she sent it to her lawyer, like a codicil.
The whole, like, she wrote it on there. You would then do subsequent writing, but separate the subsequent writing out from the physical act. Under your hypo, physical act would be met because she had the epiphany. That's the intent, right? She did the physical act of marking it out, and it was done by her. So in your hypo, physical act, all elements would be met. Then you would have to then analyze whether it was sufficient that she wrote in this letter and sent it there. But again, you would kind of do so quickly because you know it doesn't really matter, or you don't really need it because you know physical act is met. Cool.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions on revocation? Okay. So let's now get to DRR. My favorite. My favorite because it is something in class that is usually super difficult. So Yeah, Matt, you said you're in wills right now, huh? As DRR, was it given to you simple? Maybe it got better. Like you got a good understanding of it, or no? It's like kind of like a little foggy, a little hazy.
Yeah, honestly, not. Yeah, really foggy.
Yeah. So we're gonna break it down. I want you guys first to like be a blank canvas. That's usually one of the biggest issues with, sometimes these sessions is that like we're trying to simplify it. And if you're trying to simultaneously, match that with what you learn, sometimes that can make it more difficult, especially for DRR. So just take a second to literally symbolically wipe your mind of whatever you were taught. You can revisit that after you have this understanding, but be a blank canvas for me, okay? So let's start off with DRR. It's in the section of saving a will, okay? Now, really, it could be more so saving a gift, honestly, but sometimes it's like it's done when it's the only gift. So you typically see it sometimes when it's saving the entire will. But what you're trying to do is use DRR to save something. Let's start off with our general rule and read that, okay? DRR is triggered when the testator revokes a will or gift under the mistaken belief that they validly created a codicil. If the court applies DRR, then the revoked will or gift will be reinstated, okay? To try to like put that into like layman terms and a real life example of something, again, you're doing something, taking away something under the mistaken belief that you set something up. So going back to dates, let's say Matt is a player and he's got 2 girls that he's talking to. And let's say girl number 1 asks him out on a date and he says yes, right? But then he realizes girl number 2, he wants to go on a date with her. So what he does is he ends his date with girl number 1, but under his mistaken belief, he didn't actually fully set up that date with number 2. So now what is Matt left with? Matt?
Date number 1?
Shit, not yet. You ain't right now. You left with no dates
because you lagged. I couldn't hear your second part of the hypo.
So I was saying you had your setup with date number 1, but then you canceled your date with number 1 because you thought that you validly had set up a date with girl number 2, but actually it was not valid and she's not going to see you. So as of now, you have no date. Exactly. Then this is where DRR is triggered. If DRR is going to be used, it's going to reinstate date number 1, right? So take that back to wills. You have your will or gift number 1. You cross it out, you cancel it, you revoke it. But you only do so because you think that you're creating some other will or codicil that's valid. But it turns out you did something that did not meet the elements of the formalities for a valid codicil. So now, essentially, you're left with nothing. But this is where saving a gift, saving a will situation can come in to help reinstate. Okay, so to kind of ground us with that, I want you guys to now read DRR hypo number 1, and then we'll work through it. Okay. So DeAndre validly creates an attested will that states the following: I give Monique Aubrey $50,000. 2 days later, DeAndre decides his mom deserves more than $50,000. DeAndre takes a red pen and crosses out the 50,000 and writes in 100,000. DeAndre later dies. What will Monique take, if anything? So again, we have to go through this fact pattern and we have to identify fact by fact everything that created or everything that happened. So the first line tells us what, Jesse? Just the very first sentence. What's up, Jesse's man?
I'm sorry, I don't know what he's doing in here. Can you repeat it?
No. All right, so what's the very first line telling us?
It's an attested will.
That, okay, creation of an original will was made, right? Then line number 2, I give Monique $50,000. That's telling us what?
Devising a gift.
Yep, that's just the gift, the term of the will. Then it says 2 days later, DeAndre decides his mom deserves more than $50,000. What does it feel like is about to happen by that sentence?
Modification?
Exactly. And modification of a will typically come in the form of a
codicil.
There we go. Next sentence, DeAndre takes a red pen and crosses out the 50,000 and writes in 100,000. If you're a baller boss, you can see that there's two things that took place in that sentence. What two things that took place? An attempted blank and an attempted blank.
Attempted revocation.
Yep, and
the modification.
Exactly, that's it. An attempted revocation, guys, by what facts, Jesse? What's the attempted revocation?
The crossing out in the red pen and then modifying by writing in 100,000.
Exactly. Now, again, all we're going to have to do is go through all of those things to see if they were valid. Now, let me move on to, let's go with Sasha. You there, Sasha?
Yes.
Awesome. Have you been following along great with all the facts?
Yes.
All right. So tell me, is the red pen and crossing out the 50,000, is that going to be a valid revocation? And if so, what type of revocation?
It's a valid revocation by physical act?
Exactly. It was a physical act of crossing out. It was done by the testator, and it was done with simultaneous intent. It said, decides his mom deserves more beforehand. Perfect. All right, let's go now with Kareem. The next thing is we have to analyze whether writing in 100,000 is going to be a valid codicil that's essentially modifying. This is not a codicil to revoke. This is a codicil to modify. Is writing in 100,000, do you think that's going to be a valid codicil?
No.
No, and that's the correct answer. Now, this is where some of the specific rules of DRR in this section come into play, right? I want you guys all also to now go to your chart for dependent relative revocation breakdown. This is what it looks like. Okay, you guys all got it up? Perfect. So look on the left side. Don't look at the right side yet at all. Holographic hypo number 2, we're not looking at that. So what we have here is a base attested hypo. That's what the facts tell us. Then what we have on top of this attested hypo is handwritten additions made on top of this. We've already gone through most of the analysis. We went through creation. We said it was met. We went through revocation. We said it was met by physical act. Now we're in codicil. Here's where you need to know the Pfeiffer rule. The Pfeiffer rule tells us that when you have handwriting on top of an attested will, then you only look at the handwritten portion to determine the validity of that codicil. So, what was in the handwriting? Volunteer, anybody. What was in the handwriting of this modification?
$100,000.
Exactly. So Victoria, the Pfeiffer rule tells us that you can only focus on what was handwritten. So you imagine that all you had on that piece of paper was 100,000. Is that going to create a valid will or codicil? No. So that's why under the Pfeiffer rule, this codicil is not valid. Way back to our original understanding of DRR, look how the order of operation and what played out has created the DRR issue. Here, DeAndre revoked his gift of $50,000 to his mom under the mistaken belief that he was going to then give her $100,000. But based off of everything that we've gone through, Victoria, at this very moment, without applying DRR, what does my mom get?
Nothing.
Nothing, because we have a revoked original will and an invalid codicil. Now, who's going to want to argue DRR here?
Your mom.
My mom. If DRR is met and the court applies it, I should say, if the court applies DRR, what will she get?
$50,000.
Exactly. Some of you guys may have thought she'll get the 100,000. Let's make sure that that's very clear. With DRR, if it applies, they'll get the original gift that was once validly created. The court can never give her the 100,000. Why, Victoria?
Because it's over what the original valid will gave.
Let me stop you there so you don't go too far with it. It's because the 100,000 was never valid to begin with.
It's an invalid holographic policy.
Exactly. We're going back to Matt. It's like, I can't give you date number 2 with that girl because that was never set up to begin with, but we can try to restore those plans with date number 1. We can't try to restore this gift, this original gift. So when you think of DRR, essentially in your head, it's always original gift or bust, 0 or the original gift. Now, the next question is, well, how do we determine if the court will apply DRR? The court will apply DRR if doing so is consistent with the testator's intent. Here, applying DRR means giving $50,000. So then you're rewriting that in your head to say, is giving my mom $50,000 consistent with my intent? What's the answer to that? Let's go with Michelle.
Yes, because he was trying to give his mother more money, $100,000.
Exactly. And I'm definitely calling you out next session. You better be on camera. You one of the legally fit originals. Some of your black screen on me.
Sorry, I have a dog with me, so I was trying to he's right here.
Everybody wants to see a little puppy every now and
then.
Awesome. So good. Giving the 50K is going to be consistent with the testator's intent. So the court will likely apply DRR under these facts. And so under this situation, mom is happy. The court will apply it, and there we go. Now let's do some fact changes. So let's say we still kept everything the same except for mom pissed me off, and I scratched out the 50,000 and I wrote in 5,000. Michelle, will the court apply DRR then?
No, it's inconsistent with your intent or the testator's intent because you were bringing down the amount.
Yeah, and significantly, right? So for me to show my intent that I really reduce it from 50 to 5, right? That shows a significant reduction. To then give her 50,000 when I reduce it to 5, that would be inconsistent. Under these facts on the analysis though, is DRR still triggered even though it's not applied?
Yeah, you would still bring it up.
Exactly, right? Because it's still the same thing of I revoked a gift under the mistaken belief that I was validly creating the 5,000 change, but even that 5,000 change is not valid. So good. Now, let's do Shavi. Shavi, if I rewrote it to 25,000, I scratched out 150 and I wrote in 25. What do you think there?
I'm gonna say no because it's a significant change and it's lower.
Good. And so what you're going to want to do on that, Shavi, is that's when you realize that there's no clear answer with that. So what do they want from me? Arguments on both sides, soak up the points. It's not about the conclusion. So on one side, you're going to say, no, the court should not apply DRR because $25,000 is a significant reduction and giving $0 is more consistent than still giving 50,000. On the other hand, you're going to argue still giving $25,000 is a significant amount of money, and giving 50,000 is more consistent with the intent than giving 0 because 25 is such a large amount of money. So boom, argue both sides, and it's really a toss-up as to what the court would do there. So remember that, guys. It's like a lot of times in these exams, we put too much pressure on ourselves to always get the right answer, where a lot of times they're not giving you something for the right answer. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. They want you to get in there and make those arguments. So once we take that pressure off of ourselves, we can see what our true objective is, which is to see both sides and articulate it. All right, so I'm not gonna necessarily go through the entire hypo with you. I'm just gonna kind of go through the illustration. So if we look at the other side of the chart, the holographic hypo number 2, which lines up with hypo number 2 in the hypos. Basically, everything changes when you have a holographic will as your foundation. When you have a handwritten codicil on top of a handwritten will to begin with, what they then say is that when you get to the codicil part, you get to use the estate of Dumas rule that tells us that you don't have to look at the handwriting by itself, essentially, or the new handwriting. You get to look at it in consideration with everything. So now you get to have the entire sentence from the original will. Now you get to borrow the signature from the original will. So you don't have to look at it in isolation. Well, then now that becomes a valid codicil. Is DRR going to apply if it's a valid codicil? Anybody? Yep, Nicole, I see you saying no, and that is correct. It's not going to apply because you no longer revoked under the mistaken belief. You now revoked under what? Rosie?
It's a valid belief because it's a valid codicil.
Exactly. You now revoked under the valid belief because it is a valid codicil, so there's no DRR. All right, madam, coming back to you. DRR, simple, or you got some questions for me?
Very simple.
Yes.
Can I ask one small question? Typically, when you see these, like, is it normally going to say that we start with a valid holographic will?
It might not necessarily say valid, but it'll tell you always whether it was handwritten or it was typed. So you won't ever have to guess as to that part. They'll make it clear whether it was typed or holographic. Cool. So that's all DRR is. That's going to be consistent with all of what you guys have. There's typically no level of crazy detail in addition to that. So again, now you need to reword it or try to find the format and the wording you want to go through, do it. But I can tell you right now, having done at least Burger with wills, this is the exact order of operation that you have to do in order to even get to DRR. Understand, you have to go through creation of your will to begin with. You have to show that there was a valid revocation. You have to show that there was an invalid codicil because they essentially didn't write enough in there per the Pfeiffer rule. Then that is then when you can finally get to DRR. Sometimes what happens with students on an essay is that like, oh, they're like, yeah, that looks like my DRR hypo, and then just want to get straight to talking about DRR. But if you don't do that whole setup, you're losing a whole lot of points. So remember the order of operation. All right, we will move on. Any questions from anybody on DRR? Please, I know this section is difficult. Any questions before we move on? Okay. All right, let's move on to revival then. And Matt, I need you to let your playaways go, man. One day at a time. You know, we won't get in trouble that way. All right, so we're now moving on to revival. Revival is similar to DRR in that it's also within the first level section of what, Megan? Folder system question.
Saving a will?
Saving a will. This is another way to save a will. So when you have a party who wants to save a will because they were going to take under it, you're thinking DRR or revival. Now, both of them have very specific facts. So these aren't things that you just throw out on every essay. You need very specific facts. Let's talk about revival. So, and I actually had a way I wanted to do this. Let me quickly look at that. So first off, I wanted to say that I call this like the old grandpa rule. And this is even more funny now because my grandmother's in here. So please do not tell him that I talk about him during my sessions. Don't want to hear it. Okay, so the old grandpa rule is just super old school, super lay person, right, thought process. And so it's like, I think of my grandpa and he's like, all right, I make my first will and I gave everything to my favorite son, my favorite grandson, DeAndre, right? Then what happens is I pissed him off because I didn't show up to Thanksgiving. He's a super emotional grandpa, Creole man. No, you know what? I am writing up another will that gives everything to my other grandson, Eric. Just right there, what happened? We can analyze as we go now because you guys are picking up wills. What happened when he did that? Charlie?
It revoked the previous will.
And how did he do so? Subsequent writing and express or implied?
You said that Grandpa said that.
He said, I'm giving everything to my cousin or to my other grandson, Eric.
I think the strongest argument would be for implied.
Exactly. So that'll be implied. So now we have the revoked original will. Then what happens is Thanksgiving rolls down for the next year, and then my cousin Eric doesn't show up, but I show up, and my grandfather says, you know what, D, you was my favorite. I want you to have it. So what he does is he tears up the will that says he's giving everything to Eric. The will that he gave to me is still sitting in his bedroom drawer somewhere. So his grandpa way of thinking is telling him, well, shoot, I had 2 wills. I ripped up this one, so that other one must still be good. But grandpa's way of thinking is not the legal way of thinking. What do we know about that first will, Rosie?
It's no longer valid.
Exactly. This is like that original situation of contracts and an offer. When you destroy an offer, it's done. You can't just revive it, essentially. So that's the basic concept in wills, except for they have a theory and the doctrine of revival. So even though this is not necessarily the right base way of thinking, my grandfather's thought process of reviving will number 1 will be completed if the elements and the rule is satisfied for revival. So that is the whole objective with revival, is that you are reviving the original will because you thought that by revoking another will that the first one would automatically come into, fruition again. Okay. So let's kind of go through our actual trigger here in our rule, and then we'll do our hypo. Revival is triggered when T validly creates will number 1, then creates will number 2, which revokes will number 1, then revokes will number 2 under the mistaken belief that number 1 would automatically be revived. Okay. And then the court will apply revival and reinstate will number 1 if doing so is consistent with T's intent. That's how we know if it'll be done. T's method for revoking will number 2 determines how intent can be proven. Don't focus on that too much. Let's get into our actual hypo, and it'll make everything clear. So, revival. So number 1, let's look at number 1 really quickly. So Trey creates a valid attested will. Later on, he properly revokes will number 1 by physical act. Trey then changes his mind and creates a holographic codicil that says he is reviving will number 1. Trey then staples all of the pieces of the torn up will to the new codicil. Has will number 1 been revised? So read that if you need to on your own, because I know it's like very short and like, what, will number 1? But that's the fact pattern. Give me a volunteer and tell me, is that going to be a situation where the court will apply revival? Okay, we see Matt says, yeah. Shavi, what you say?
I'm honestly still reading it.
Okay. That was the thinking hand in a way. Okay, the hand went up. Matt, I'm going to go with you, and everybody else is still reading it. I'm going to tell you, said, yeah, the answer is going to be no. So this is a quick question that I threw out in the beginning just to kind of trip you up here a little bit. Understand that it does not meet some of the basic things that we said or which you see with revival. So I'll read my answer. No, will number 1 has not been revived because the rule for revival was not met. Revival is triggered when the testator validly creates will number 1, then validly creates will number 2, which revokes will number 1 by subsequent writing, then revokes will number 2 under the mistaken belief that will number 1 will automatically be revived. You didn't have that entire sequence of events. Here, will number 1 was not destroyed by subsequent writing, but rather by physical act. When the original will is revoked by physical act, it simply can't be revived. And again, it destroys that whole original thought process that like, oh, I still got that like 1 valid will still somewhere. And also look out for situations where, like this fact pattern, it'll say, oh, I want to revive. Just because somebody says I'm reviving will number 1 doesn't mean they're actually reviving will number 1. So just a little red herrings there and things to trip you up. let's get into number 2. And I want you guys, well, let's read it and then I'll have you guys do it. So, testator validly creates an attested will that says, this is my will. I give everything to my mom, or everything to mom. Testator then stores will number 1 in a safety deposit box. 2 weeks later, testator gets into a fight with his mom and decides to revoke her gift. He then writes on a napkin, this is my will. I give everything to my dad. Testator folds up the napkin and keeps it in his wallet. 1 month later, testator gets into a fight with his dad. Testator realizes he loves his mom more and wants her to have everything instead. So again, you get this like flip-flop situation. He remembers that he still has the original will in the safety deposit box. Testator is with his girlfriend when he takes the will out of his wallet and says, I hate my dad. I want my mom to have everything. He then rips up the will. Testator then dies. The original will is still in the safety deposit box. Who is entitled to the estate, mom or dad? Okay, to help us visualize this, I want you guys to now bring out your chart for revival. And we have a timeline. I'll tell you guys right now, timelines will save your life for the fact patterns for wills. That's one of my like major test strategy tips for everybody taking wills, especially Berger, is as you're going through the fact pattern, you should have an ongoing timeline that you're creating so you can see everything as you go. So if we're looking at this, we have will number 1, you give everything to mom, stored it in the box. That's going to be a discussion of creation. Looks, everything is good there. 10 days later, he created will number 2, which said, I give everything to dad, wrote it on a napkin, signed it, kept it in his wallet. That was revocation of will number 1 by subsequent writing. Stop right there. That should make sense to everybody. Are we all clear up until that point? Okay, good. I see a lot of shaking heads. All right. So then a month later, the testator revokes will number 2 with the intent to revive will number 1. But the issue is reviving a revoked will is not that simple. There is no revival unless the court applies the revival doctrine. So the question is, will the court apply revival here? Only if doing so is consistent with T's intent. So what are the best facts that we have to prove intent here, Megan?
Okay, let's see.
And we're looking for intent to revive will number 1.
Sorry, I'm just rereading the facts right now. That he still kept will number 1. He didn't destroy it.
That's good. That's going to be like the last fact that you may not even get to because that's not your best one. But let's hold on to that. Maria, what do you think the best argument or fact is to prove T's intent to revive will number 1? Sasha? No. Elijah?
Could it be extrinsic evidence?
But tell me specifically what that is. What is the fact in this fact pattern that is the best thing to prove that he had the intent to revive will number 1?
I hate my dad. I want my mom to have everything.
Exactly. And what was that?
What do you mean? What was that? I'm not sure what your question is.
Yeah. You just said, I hate my dad. I want my mom to have everything. Like, give me the context around that statement. Like, what was that? You know, what's the context around that statement?
It's showing his intent to get rid of the first or the second one, and I guess revive the first one to his mom.
Okay. The context that I'm looking for is that was the testator's statement to the girlfriend that he was making that. So it was a oral statement. That's not something written, right? That's going to be something that was told to the girlfriend. Testator is dead at this point. So the only way that we are going to be able to get in this intent to revive will number 1 is if we admit what into testimony?
Extrinsic evidence.
Right? And the extrinsic evidence is going to be her coming to court to testify. So I want to make sure you guys understand what extrinsic evidence is, because it's easy to say extrinsic evidence. But we need to know that if she were to come into court and testify, testator told me, blah, 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 that is your extrinsic evidence. And so, yes, that is how we would want to prove it. Now, here's the thing. You can't always allow extrinsic evidence when you're trying to use revival. How do you know when you can? It depends, follow me, on the way in which they revoked will number 2. How was will number 2 revoked here? By physical act or by subsequent writing? Elijah?
Subsequent writing.
It was, let me double check on that.
Oh, will number 2.
Yes. How was will number 2 revoked? The one for dad.
Oh, he rips up that will, so physical act, so then extrinsic evidence can be used to prove intent.
Okay. So yes, you kind of went ahead, so I want to do one step at a time so everybody can see it clearly. How was will number 2 revoked? It was revoked by physical act. Looking at our chart, what does it tell us? If will number 2 is revoked by physical act, then extrinsic evidence is allowed. Right? That simple. So then we can, as long as the girlfriend comes and testifies as to that, that testimony can come in, that testimony will prove intent. Since intent is proven, the court will apply revival. Now, if we simply change these facts, right, and follow me, if the testator revoked will number 2 by creating another written document, okay, everybody, eyes up and follow me on this one. Testator created another document that revoked will number 2, and that document said, I don't want my dad to take anything anymore. I revoke that will. Period. Done. While he was doing that, he was with his girlfriend, and he said, hey, babe, I just created another revocation codicil to revoke my dad. I want my mom to get everything. I'm so happy now. You know, cool. Just make sure nothing happens to that will in the safety deposit box for me. Is the court going to apply revival there? No. Right? And why is that? Megan, how was will number 2 revoked here?
By a subsequent, by subsequent writing?
Exactly. What does the rule tell us, Nicole, for subsequent writing if it's revoked by, if will number 2 is revoked by subsequent writing?
Then only the writing may be used to prove intent, no extrinsic evidence.
So boom, wipe out girlfriend testifying altogether. Can't happen because it was revocation by subsequent writing. Nicole, does the contents of the subsequent writing revocation that I told you in there tell us or prove that I had the intent to revive will number 1?
I believe so. I think that's what you said.
And I know this is when we get back to oral hypos and it can be difficult, but no, the answer is no. And because here's all that I said. I hate my dad. I don't want him to get anything anymore. So I revoke my gift to him. Period. Done. So in this, we have the issue. In the actual writing itself, all you have is language of revocation and no language of reviving, and it's subsequent writing. Those are scenarios where typically no revival will be applied. So if you're thinking critically, Michelle, tell me how under that subsequent writing situation, we could solve the issue where revival would apply.
You would say the language of revoking, and then you would say, I would like to revive, I don't know, for lack of a better word, will number 1.
Exactly. So in the writing itself, you would have to have the language of revocation, and you would have to prove your intent right there and say something like, and I'm happy I'm doing this because I want mom to have everything again. Like, that's enough, right? And of course, if they use the word revive, even better, it's more clear and more explicit. All right, that's all revival is. Obviously, right, they're going to really test you and get you on knowing how will number 2 is revoked and knowing whether or not you can use that extrinsic evidence. If it's physical act, we got no writing to rely on. So all we got is extrinsic evidence. We can use that then. But if it was revoked by subsequent writing, I don't want to hear that extrinsic evidence. We got a writing, all I'm going to look at is that writing. So that can be like a nice little way to remember when extrinsic evidence is used. And that's what it essentially comes down to. Like that's where most of your revival issues, like that's where they focus the points and the attention is knowing about that extrinsic evidence. So similar to DRR, but definitely, as you see now, different. Any questions on revival? Nope. Was it good? Was it clear? Perfect, perfect, perfect. Awesome. All righty, guys. Well, that then gets us through pretty much half of wills. So here's what you want to do as far as a follow-up. My recommendation is one, definitely go through the rest of the hypos and blueprints shortly after this session, preferably today, if not tomorrow, while it's all fresh. Also, then feel free to revisit your outlines for those of you that are in class. So again, you kind of get the most bang for your buck and you're not trying to then revisit what we did in this lecture, 3 weeks from now, and it's not flowing as much. So try to definitely follow that momentum and lock some stuff down, because hopefully a lot more things are clear within wills. 2 things before you guys get out of here. One, we're going to share in here again. A lot of you guys are interested in early bar prep and regular, and this was kind of like, ooh, maybe I'm interested. And so if you guys didn't already have, we're going to give you guys some of our info packets so you guys can know the details about that. And then also, very, very important, please, if you like this session, this free session that was for you, please fill out this feedback form and give me some actual feedback. Because again, I want to make this as best as possible. We're still aiming and looking to do early bar prep and regular in person if we can. And as we all see what's going on with the news, it's like, who knows if we're going to be able to do that. So in the meantime, I want to simultaneously, make this Zoom session as great as I can for you guys. So I need to know what you guys think. So we'll put in the chat now both the info packets for bar prep and the feedback form. It's like a Google form. You can just click on the link and fill it out. Oh, what to say that loud? We're emailing the packets. Oh, with the charts. Oh, also too, yeah, I forgot. Surprise, there's some more charts that we're gonna send you guys. So basically, I'm gonna send you guys the 2nd and 3rd level if yours looks like chicken scratch, because I had you guys write it in yourself and maybe it was incomplete. We're gonna also email you guys a completed version of the 2nd level and 3rd level, so you can have some nice visual diagrams for building on your understanding. And then also too, what we'll do is 2 quickly things. One, I remembered, I told you I'd hook up all my law students with my outline, so stick around for that. Any last questions on the session overall, bar prep overall, before we let some of the people go who don't have any need to stay? Charlie?
Hi. Okay. I have a quick practical question because I noticed how you were talking about losing points and running out of time. And that's a big concern with the bar. So, but how do you, I guess strategically, how do you do that? Because okay, so you're gonna answer your questions in the order of that, right? The points. But as far as writing it out on the essay or how you're gonna submit it, do you then go out of order if you have 3 slam dunks and then you have?
Exactly. And that's the annoying part, is that you don't, sometimes it's not your last issue in the essay that's the prioritized one, but you have to talk about all this other stuff. So, and this is what in our bar prep we just focus on, because the only way you get good at this is 1, knowing the law well, 2, knowing the patterns for what is typically the focus of attention. As you heard me say a lot of times, revival, typically the prioritized issue is the extrinsic evidence. So kind of knowing where typically the points are. But then 3 is a lot of times, as we'll practice in bar prep, it's when you do an essay, sometimes we just get to writing right away, right? As opposed to pulling back for a second, stopping and thinking all right, I see all of what's going on here. What are they really focusing on? Where are my points at? Then creating an outline that is resemblant and showing us that. Then what it takes is then actual discipline when you're going through the other issues to not squeeze in all those arguments. If I know this is a non-prioritized issue, I have to go through this quickly. But that's where we get into trouble, where it's just like, no, I want to give that the same attention as something that is a prioritized issue, and you run into trouble, right? It's like you got Thanksgiving dinner, it's Friendsgiving. Shane, you're in charge of the turkey. I need you to go to Trader Joe's and get everything for a bomb turkey. And then he knows, like, oh shit, I also need some milk and some cereal and all this stuff for my house. But then he starts getting distracted with all these other things he needs. And it's like, you forgot to focus on the turkey. You might have now maybe missed certain ingredients. He left out the rosemary, right? Whatever it may be, because his mind was elsewhere, where it's like, no, even if I am going to pass the milk aisle on the way to the turkey, I can't sit here and really figure out if I want almond milk, do I want whole milk, do I want 2%? If I'm gonna get here, I just gotta grab that milk real quick. I gotta get to this turkey. I know that's what I'm here for. So it's just a matter of staying disciplined and knowing that, again, your objective is not to like show off in a sense. Even though you know all the elements of creation, if creation is not why I'm testing you right now, then go through it quickly. Don't show off for the sake of showing off. Get to it. So that gives you like a nice little short answer, Charlie. And then just know that like, what it is a build and process, like a progress thing of knowing that mentality and applying it in your practice. Cool. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so no other questions. So what we'll do from there is that for all of those that were, you know, taking the bar and you're not in law school, please just fill out the feedback form and click on that before you exit out. But you guys are essentially good to go. Yeah, deadlines and all that stuff for bar prep, you guys should know about all that already. Reach out to us if you're interested. And then for my law school people, let me lace you guys with my outline. You're welcome, Robert. So this is going to definitely kind of like go into a little bit of the extra detail that some of your professors may do, but especially for Berger, don't get too bogged down by all the little stuff, because he also likes to test, you know, the big concepts. So how are you guys having your finals this year, by the way?
Online.
So all online, it's an all open book. Perfect. So I'll tell you this, for Berger, for the multiple choice, I pretty much looked up every single multiple choice. And it's not something I normally advise or do.
Yeah, there's not going to be multiple choice this year.
He's doing two essays this year. Just 2 essays, 4 hours.
There we go. All right, so 2 essays. So that his essays are pretty straightforward. Make sure you do all of his essays too that he has online. Like literally do every single one. All right, here we go. All right, Wills and Trust. I called it the Wills and Trust outline. Chat. So you can also, again, use this, Victoria. I know you have another professor, you know, again, still use it as reference. Okay. Also look out for possibly any changes that may, oh, I said that to somebody privately. I need to do everyone. Look out for any changes, right? This is obviously from when I was in law school, and as much as I like to forget it, it's been a while since I've been in law school. So could be small changes that he's done to his lecture. Now, for those doing Berger, here's what I'll tell you. And when you're doing these practice exams, literally this way that I kind of created that first level, that's how you want to start off. His exams have a very, very consistent pattern. The very first chunk of your exam is going to be taking all of what you saw in the timeline and figuring out what is my actual will and what are my codicils that will be actually added to it. You're gonna have some maybe codicils that were invalid, so you rule that out. You're gonna have an original will that was invalid, but then the second one was. So again, that whole first part of the exam, you almost wanna like separate it into 2 parts. First part is secure the will and the right documents to know what I'm dealing with. Then the next phase is what are there any issues with the terms of my will, right? So that's where you might have issues with the gift. That's then when that comes up. So if you see an incorporation by reference issue right in the very beginning, you can't talk about that in the beginning. And that's how that'll be. His first like page will actually have the will, and you'll see in there, I give a gift to the person stated on this list. Well, I don't know who that is. That's incorporation by reference or all those things. But again, when you're actually writing it out, you won't talk about that issue until after you secured your will. And then after saving a gift, then you go through stuff happens. So again, this literally is giving you like step-by-step mark of how to go through it, and you'll see the pattern in the system. So that should really help. Once I figured that out for Berger, going through his essays was super simple. And what I would do is literally, as I'm reading, I would essentially kind of like just do something basic like this, which is like creating a little, oh, can't see that from that far. Just create a little timeline, right? And then you're just adding in the events that took place as you went through. And then as you add the events, you can also add the actual theories or doctrines that need to be discussed under that. And actually, you get a really good example of that when you're looking at the revival chart. So if you saw, I started putting in the facts, and then in green, I'm like, I know what this is going to be used for. For the first one, that's going to be used for creation. And for will number 2, like that language what took place, that's going to be for revocation of a will, subsequent writing, right? So again, you're basically like issue spotting as you go. So just play with it. It'll just take some practice, but I'm telling you, doing the timeline, spotting the issues as you go is going to be super beneficial. Okay. You guys got the outline. All right. It's Saturday. It's 2 o'clock. You guys go. I don't know if we'll be doing another pop-up or anything like this for the rest of the semester. If we do, we'll definitely let you guys know. Otherwise, I hope to see a lot of you guys in early bar prep coming up soon. Happy holidays, Thanksgiving. Don't be spreading Corona. Stay safe. Yeah, I'll see you guys all soon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.